Smallville, the live-action depiction of a young Clark Kent graduating from high school while learning to control superpowered abilities. It's an interesting take on the superhero genre that even viewers that don't actively keep up with DC Comics can jump into and follow along from the beginning with an independent story, because when it comes down to it, Smallville as a show is just a version of Superman's origin story, beginning with how he arrived on Earth. Clark, never being a citizen of Smallville, or Earth for that matter, arrived during a catastrophic meteor shower that brought death and destruction upon the town and changed the course of history forever. Hidden amongst the raining hellfire was a spaceship containing an infant from the planet Krypton named Kal-El. Later, we discovered that this ship was sent as a last resort due to the eradication of the Kryptonian race. Kal-El crash-landed in the middle of a cornfield belonging to the farmers Jonathan and Martha Kent. Luckily for planet Earth, they were mild-mannered folk with good moral values, and were open to the idea of adopting an alien baby due to Martha's inability to bear children. They named him Clark, and through a series of delicate plot holes, he was able to have a normal life without his true identity ever being discovered. Immediately upon arrival, they show Clark having super strength and impenetrable skin, even as a toddler. They chose to skip the most difficult stage of Clark's life to explain, adolescence, and begin the story with Clark in the first year of high school. He attends Smallville High, the school with a social hierarchy revolving around the football team. Like any other show from the 2000s, the 30-year-old football jocks and cultist cheerleaders decided who was cool and who wasn't. Clark, despite being a 6'3" good-looking guy with a six-pack, was deemed uncool by the jocks shorter than him, and sentenced him to a night strung up like a scarecrow in the middle of a field. They spray-painted an S on his chest as a not-so-subtle nod and left him for dead. If he is super strong and invincible, how did they manage to overpower him? The answer is kryptonite, or at this point in the story, the green meteor rocks that plagued Smallville during their meteor shower years ago. Strange rocks with a green glow that do whatever the plot desires during each episode, usually at the price of their mental stability and moral judgment. But one consistent plot device with kryptonite is that it strips Clark of his Kryptonian abilities. Clark's in love with the most popular girl in school, Lana Lang, who happens to be the girlfriend of Whitney, the guy trying to bully Clark. And she happens to have a necklace made of kryptonite, which Lana happens to give to Whitney, who happens to think it would be disrespectful to put his girlfriend's necklace around Clark's neck while they string him up, which happens to be the only sequence of events that would ever allow this to happen. If you think it's a little too convenient, then buckle up, because even though all of this occurs in the first episode, this type of storyboarding pretty much remains the same for the rest of the show. Something I enjoy about kryptonite is that the moment Clark is not around it, he returns to normal quickly, and I mean fast. Instead of Clark staggering to his feet every time trying to catch his breath, they chose to go the more unique route of him snapping back to it and not lingering on the agony. Since Clark is around kryptonite so often for plot purposes, this saves way more time than you can imagine. At the beginning of the show, nobody other than Clark's parents are aware of his abilities and alien heritage. They do a great job of showing just how different of a level Clark is on compared to the meteor freaks. The freaks usually have one ability based on the method that they were exposed to kryptonite, usually like a manipulation of something. Clark, on the other hand, has super strength, super speed, X-ray vision, super hearing, and heat vision. In order to give the freaks a chance, Clark usually speeds into the room they're in, gets weak due to convenient kryptonite, and then one of the side characters arrives and kicks the kryptonite away, allowing Clark to take care of business just in time. It's classic Superman, but it's also expected Superman, and it's not completely the writer's fault. With all the options Clark has, somehow they all actually limit him and restrict his character. He's a one-dimensional character with a single weakness. Establishing a single weakness means that in order to drive any conflict in an episode where the hero can do anything he wants, that single weakness will have to make an appearance in some form. Otherwise, the character wouldn't be allowed to participate in any part of the plot. Similar to Saitama from One Punch Man. An unstoppable character only functions in an entertaining plot if he isn't part of most of it. They're usually reserved for the end of the episode to resolve everything. Being the most powerful man on the planet, but also having an accessible weakness, forces Clark to be leashed the plot device every episode. It makes the viewer say, oh, well, if it wasn't for bad luck, Clark would have just ended the episode right at the beginning. And I say luck because it actually is luck. For the first half of the show, absolutely none of the antagonists he faces are aware of Clark's single weakness. It's just fortunate that it happens to be around to add some short-lived artificial tension. And since he always wins with his powers, there's always only two options. Either Clark gets killed because he's affected by kryptonite, therefore ending the show, or something knocks the kryptonite away from him, making him win. It's interesting enough to hook the viewer and draw him in, but at times, the action turns out to be the least interesting part of the episode. In my opinion, what I cared about most was Lex. And not just Lex, but how Lex interacted with Clark. Lex Luthor, the rich and young heir to the Luthor Core Company. The most manipulative mind who gets manipulated the entire time. The most powerful kingpin that can't seem to accomplish any goal he sets his sights on. The most ambitious character who spends all of his time hanging around teenagers. He's the best character, and in my opinion, the best actor. He's obsessive, eccentric, unpredictable, and unfortunately for Clark, driven purely by curiosity. At the beginning of the show, Lex drives his car off a bridge, swerving directly into Clark, knocking them both into the water. As Lex is drowning and losing consciousness, Clark, who's unaffected by the crash, rips off the car door and pulls Lex to the surface. This was the beginning of their friendship, but also the beginning of Lex's questions. Although he was thankful, he couldn't get over how either of them survived, and how the door was seemingly ripped off. Lex attempted to materialistically thank Clark by giving him a truck, which was promptly refused by Clark's father, Jonathan. It's here that the corrupted and tainted reputation of Luthor Corps is established. Jonathan wants nothing to do with the Luthors, presenting information to the viewer that contradicts what we're seeing. Jonathan, alongside others, claim that Luthor Corps destroys families, companies, and towns, all for a profit. But we're seeing an appreciative Lex Luthor who's trying to repay the Kents in any way possible. The viewers haven't been given any reason to distrust Lex, but now we start to question his intentions because Jonathan firmly states that you can never trust a Luthor. Lex claims that the horrible acts of Luthor Corps are due to his father, Lionel Luthor, and that he's trying to change the way everyone thinks about the company. Lex is confused by the rejection of his gift, and realizes that Clark is different from the wealthy breed that he usually interacts with. He's a simple farm boy who takes his interest due to the bridge incident, but appears innocent enough to actually make a true friend out of, something Lex has never had due to his familial ties. From this point onward, Lex appears in episodes usually as a lifeline due to his resources, money, and connections. He offers help to Clark and his friends when dealing with meteor freaks, and even risks his life at times to protect them, since they've done the same for him. Although Lex is painted to be a ruthless businessman who fakes a smile, there are many scenes with Lex in private where he defends Clark and the Kent family, while working behind the scenes to offer his own form of a solution. It leaves the viewers confused, but in a good way. It makes you intrigued, and it doesn't provide a black and white answer to can we trust him. Usually when a show wants you to be uncertain about a character's intentions, you don't really get to see anything from their perspective. We get to see Lex from his side, see his decision making, and pass judgment on him for ourselves as he attempts to defy the image of his father. The frequent incidents with meteor freaks are brushed off by Clark, but they stick with Lex. He pieces together that these events are getting more frequent. People are dying, and nothing is being done about it. He discovers that the meteor rocks are the cause, and that those affected become aggressive and impulsive, and he dumps his resources into researching meteor rocks and their victims. Slowly, it's revealed that Lex's heroic drive to save the human race includes experimenting on the meteor inflicted against their will, bleeding the lines of what should be done and what needs to be done. In Lex's eyes, if the ends justify the means, he will sacrifice the few for the many, or rather, just himself. His encounters force him to look towards Clark, his closest friend, who seems to just appear at every unusual event that occurs in Smallville, creating suspicion of Clark himself being a meteor inflicted. Although Lex considers him a friend, he can't help but launch an investigation to find out if Clark is hiding anything. Seeds of mistrust, lies, and secrets. Slowly, the polar personalities of Clark and Lex start to create a rift between them. Clark discovers the morally incorrect actions of Lex, and Lex just grows tired of Clark's lies. Smallville does a wonderful job of working in the gray. There's no villain. There's no character in the show that is inherently evil or malicious. Although Lex and Lionel are the antagonists, they're not the villains. They're living in the fear of the unknown, which is the most realistic part of the show. They react in a way that is reasonable from a losing position. In Lex and Lionel's defense, they're preparing and protecting themselves from an unstoppable unknown, the progressive growth of the meteor freak threat. And when the time for war arrives, they refuse to be unknowledgeable and unarmed. If you haven't watched Smallville, I heavily recommend it. It was recommended to me by my good friend Ross, aka Thundergun. As soon as I started watching, I ended up binging all 9 seasons. I definitely recommend giving the show a chance, even if it does have some silly moments. If you like this type of video, let me know. I had a great time writing the script for this episode and a great time recording it. Until next time, thank you.